everybody, welcome. I'm so glad you're here to join me today because I have a story that I would like to share with you. This is a story about how a branch in mathematics came to be. And this part of mathematics that I'm talking about, this special branch, is called geometry. Now, geometry wasn't always something people cared about. The first humans to walk this earth put most of their time and energy towards hunting animals to eat and gathering food from the earth to eat and just finding a safe place to rest for the night. They likely eventually developed ways to count quantities and use arithmetic, so that's the beginning of math. But they really didn't have a need for geometry because geometry is the word geometry means measuring the earth. So nomadic people who wandered from place to place really didn't have much of a need to measure the earth, measure the land, because they were just wandering around so much. So the need didn't actually arise until the early inhabitants of the Nile Valley in northern Africa, in a place that is now known as Egypt. They began to farm thousands of years ago. So this changed things because when people realized that they could, plant seed in the ground and things would grow, they didn't have so much of a need to move around from place to place. They could settle into small communities. So eventually they had rulers called pharaohs during this time, but for the most part, the people actually got to kind of own their own bits of land, so to speak, which is pretty awesome. But there's a problem. You see, cutting through this valley that I'm talking about, there was a river called the Nile River, and it would flood. It would flood, and so the stakes that people had in the ground that would mark their territory, the water would rise past them, and people had no way to really know that boundary between lands. Imagine all of the arguing and disputes that would arise from this problem between neighbors. So the Egyptians came up with a solution. They had these special workers called rope stretchers, and what they would do is they would knot off a bit of rope. I don't know if you can see, so it would be in like 13 different knots. So they would have different sections, and what they would do is one person would hold the two ends of the rope together, like that, like right here. And then on knot number 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, that's where the next person would stretch. And then on knot number 8, 5, 6, 7, 8, another person would hold their end. And so what they ended up making, was a triangle with a perfect corner. A right angle, as you might have learned to call it in school. So that's what the rope stretchers would do over the land. But something was very special about these triangles that they made, because one section would have maybe 3 different spaces, the other section would have 4, and the other would have 5, right? So they knew which knots to hold. It didn't matter if they were using small units, small increments of measure, like the one I had, or really, really big one with bigger units. It didn't really matter how big or small those spaces were, as long as that relationship was preserved between one side was 3, one side was 4, and one side was 5. As long as they followed that pattern, they would always get a perfect corner. So actually that relationship is called a ratio, and if you have not yet learned about ratios, I am so excited for you to learn that knowledge later on. But for now, back to our Egyptians, it was very important for them to be able to have a way to measure a perfect corner because they used it a lot in building their pyramids. So imagine building a wall like this. So here's the ground. Let's say you wanted it going straight up, perfectly straight up. Wouldn't it be just so awkward if you measured that wrong and maybe the side of the wall was like a little tilted? Or maybe it was accidentally like a little tilted this way. That would just be so difficult. So they needed a way to make sure that this bottom corner was like the most perfect corner so that their wall was straight. Well, given what they knew about those special right angled triangles, the 3, 4, 5 sides, if they measured the height to be 3 and the length along the bottom to be 4, it didn't matter if they were using little units, if it was maybe a small wall or a gigantic wall, it didn't matter as long as that ratio of 3, 4 made 5 along the long side of the triangle, then they knew that they had a perfect corner. And if it didn't, then they would need to adjust their wall. So geometry was used not only for surveying, which is that first example of when the people would like use the ropes to make sure that the land was measured correctly. And it wasn't just used for construction, like in my pyramid example, but it was also used for navigation, figuring out like how to navigate how to travel. And it was also used for astronomy and measuring the things that they could see in the stars. So this type of math, it's funny because when you are getting lessons in geometry, they were measuring the space of the earth using lines, shapes, angles, area, and even volume. And these are the lessons that you have been learning in school. So it's crazy to think that the geometry lessons that you receive are actually really, really old. So the Egyptians are pretty much credited for a lot of ideas that we have in geometry, but actually evidence shows that they likely got a lot of those ideas from the Babylonians, the Hindu civilization, and the ancient Chinese. So here's a challenge for you. Think about a geometry lesson you've had recently. Is it, a lesson? Was it a lesson about types of triangles? Was it a lesson about finding the circumference of a circle? Think about a lesson that you've had and see if you can research the origins of that concept. So like who figured it out, who discovered it, under what circumstances did they discover that concept in geometry, and see what you can find. It's really fun and interesting to know the story of geometry. So good luck, happy learning, and I'll see you next time.